Welcome to the beautiful town of Killarney in East Kerry, a town which has been home to Sliabh Luachra music now for many years. I'm standing beside a bronze statue of my late grandfather, the renowned Sliabh Luachra button accordionist Johnny O'Leary. In this programme, we'll be exploring the rich cultural heritage of all things East Kerry, and in particular, the Sliabh Luachra area.
The two words Sliabh Luachra now resonate with people from all over the world. I think it would be fair to say that its name and fame has spread far more than what even many of the local legends of the area could have imagined or wished for. There is no doubting, however, that Sliabh Luachra has indeed produced some of the greatest artists to ever come out of this country. The renowned fiddle player Paddy Cronin once remarked to me that he felt no place produced better talent than Gneeguilla in East Kerry. And while Paddy may have been showing some bias towards his home place, there is no doubting the fact that this rural part of East Kerry has produced some monumental figures. Poets such as Aogán Ó Rathaille and Aogán Ó Rathaille, the great Shanachie Eamon Kelly, as well as a whole host of traditional Irish musicians. As a matter of fact, the majority of the most famous and best loved commercial recordings of Sliabh Luachra music feature musicians from the Gneeguilla area. Musicians such as Dennis Murphy, Julia Clifford, John Clifford, Billy Clifford, Johnny O'Leary, Ellen O'Leary, Dan O'Leary, Jimmy Doyle, Paddy Cronin and Johnny Cronin. What better way to start but by listening to four greats of Sliabh Luachra music in action. Johnny O'Leary on the button accordion, along with his great friend and long-term musical partner, the legendary fiddle player Dennis Murphy. Dennis's nephew Billy Clifford is on flute and Dennis McMahon is on fiddle.
Yeah, it was a very exciting time to be going on the television, you know, and playing along with the cream of the crop, you know. It was. I really enjoyed it. I have to say, it was something special, you know, very, very special. Yeah.
Long before Sliabh Luachra became famous for traditional music, it was even more famous for its poets. And I'm going back now to the 16th and the 17th centuries, and two stand out in particular, Aogán Ó Rathaille and Aogán Ó Rathaille. They were among the four great Kerry poets, the others being Shafri O'Donoghue and Pierce Fertair. And there's a monument to them in Killarney.
I suppose you can go back to about 1650, and you have the poets.
Yes.
It started on another field, on another field of art, I suppose. Mm-hmm. And you had 1650, 1726. You had Aogán Ó Rathaille, mm-hmm. And then he was fabulous, like. Mm-hmm. And then 20 odd years after, another one came. Aogán Ó Rathaille, 1748. Mm-hmm. To 1784. Mm-hmm. So, like, you had the poetry first, mm-hmm. And then he died in 1784 and left a lot of his songs are still being sung around, you know. Eamon Shal, on Spalador, the side, which the edging of the side and all that, the Spalador. And I suppose you could say the music grew out of that then. You had the Corny Drews and the Callahans of Doon and down to Poetic. And so there was a line from 1650 of art. There's a great word in Greek, Mount Parnassus is a place in Greece, and it's sacred to art. So we're talking here about two branches of the arts. Starting with the poetry and the ashling poetry, and to the music. This area would be the Mount Parnassus of Ireland.
Aogán was the oldest of the two, and Aogán Ó Rathaille was a poet for the big houses, the Irish and the Gaelic ruling classes. And they were his patrons as well, so he depended on them. He made his living from them, and they supported him in as much as they could. And his type of poetry, he was famous for his ashling, which were kind of visionary poems. Gillian na Gilla was the most famous poem, Brightness of Brightness, the most famous ashling that he wrote. And he also wrote elegies and satires. Now, he saw a big change in Irish society during his own lifetime, because after the Battle of the Boyne and the Treaty of Limerick, there was the decline of the Irish ruling classes, and that they lost a lot of their lands and their wealth and what have you. And a lot of Aogán Ó Rathaille's poetry sort of bemoans the fall of the big houses. Now, he was born in Scrahanaville, which is only a few miles west of Guineaguilla, and he died in around 1726, and he's buried in Muckross Abbey, Killarney.
Aogán Ó Rathaille's name and legacy continue to serve as inspiration to many scholars today, particularly those who study the Irish language and indeed poetry. His name lives on within the music of Sliabh Luachra, and he is fondly remembered in the great slow air of the locality called Ó Rathaille's Grave, dedicated in his honour. We will now hear the legendary Sliabh Luachra fiddler, Jula Clifford, performing this beautiful air, Ó Rathaille's Grave.
Owen Rose Sullivan was a different type of character. He was a man of the people in every sense of the word. And he was a rakish type of a man. He drank a lot, he womanized a lot, and he was a sort of a folk hero, if you like. And his poetry was written in the language of the people, the plain people, we'll call them for want of a better expression. And they recited his poetry around the firesides, and they spoke about him in his escapades. Eamon Kelly, in fact, remembered as a child growing up and listening to people around his own fireside in Carrageen talking about Aogán Ó and reciting some of his poetry. And it's a testament to his standing as a folk hero that he's still spoken about today in Sliabh Luachra and beyond.
Agus tá buint leis ná leis níomháin leis na ceoltóireacht, tá buinte leis scíoileacht agus leis sílíocht, agus tá nó nuair a bhíos óg de bhíoh even gí go raibh bíorlar fad a bhíag mo winter sáile mar sin féin de bhí scíalta acu mar jaall ar Aogán Ó.
He started life as a teacher. He opened his first school in Guineaguilla, but that didn't last too long because one day a young lady from the locality presented him with his child. And Then he moved to Knocknagree, and he didn't last too long there either, and he moved on, he kept moving. And eventually he became a spalpeen, or a travelling farm labourer, and he went around Cork and Limerick and Munster, different parts of Munster. And all the time writing poetry and entertaining people in pubs or wherever people gathered, anything like that. You could find him in the middle of the action having the crack. Now, he lived to be only 36 years of age, so he had quite a short life. But he wrote an awful lot of poetry, satires, elegies, ashlingy, and a lot of the poetry is still available today. So Owen's life ended quite tragically. He wrote a satire about a Colonel Daniel Cronin from Killarney, and Mr. Cronin was not impressed. He was quite angry about it, and Cronin's henchmen attacked Owen Rue one day in a pub in Killarney, and the story is that he was hit over the head with the tongs and very seriously injured. So what did he do in his moment of great trauma and distress? He headed back to his own country again, to Sliabh Luachra. And he went to Knocknagree for some reason, and he spent his final days in a hut just east of the church. And there he died. And to this day, there's a plaque which was erected by Aogán Ó Rathaille several years ago at the church gate in Knocknagree. And written on that plaque are Owen Rue's last words. Sinné an fille go faun, nor a hitan an piaun as a love. Weak indeed is the poet when the pen falls from his hand.
Eamon Kelly was one of Ireland's best-loved storytellers and Shanachese. He was born in the townland of Galawn in Guinevere before his family later moved to Corrigeen in the parish of Glenflesk. I am proud to say that Eamon Kelly is in fact a relation of mine, as he and my grandmother Lil, wife of Johnny O'Leary, were in fact first cousins. Eamon often humorously joked that had Johnny not been such a good musician, he wouldn't have allowed him to marry his first cousin Lil. A statue of Eamon Kelly sits proudly in the village of Guinevere, only a few miles from his birthplace in Galawn.
Better gur in I'm sure Owen Rue agus na Fiddle a hánig an ceolaisteach go Sliabh Luachra. Ach da no is tá clú agus cáil Sliabh Luachra nis mar eolar a geol. All the old people in Galawn spoke Irish. Gurling fada vieco, fado. Ach an úrsan nor hédi sé stack a chilarna. Vioch na dini chilarna taken to Diano Magadov. Also they'd be making fun of them because they were speaking Irish.
That's it. Yeah.
And I was a man from Galawn went into this shop in Killarney. I guess he sé can of quota. He would buy a coat.
Yes, yeah.
I guess sé kindlen van taken to Oscoilge. I guess Heinig for a shopper and the man in the shop came and he said, "Give over your colour in Irish. We all speaks the King's English here." I guess, well, this is a good cador, but my man said, if the King of England walked in the door this minute, he'd hardly understand what you're saying.
Eamon was probably one of the best known Sliabh Luachra people of his generation, no doubt about that. And he was born in Galawn in 1914. He was the eldest in a family of 8 children. He went to the Tech in Killarney at night, and he studied there, and he qualified eventually as a woodwork teacher. And he taught for many years around South Kerry, and then eventually he went to Listowel, and that was a very important landmark in his career. That was around 1944. And in Listowel, he met Brian McMahon, the great writer and playwright, what have you. And he became part of the Listowel drama group at McMahon's insistence, really. He very quickly got into the acting. He seemed to come in naturally to it. And he was playing once in the play by the Western World, Christy Mahan, the main part. And a young lady called Maura Sullivan came in as Peggy and Mike, who was Christy Mahan's sidekick. And they were lovers on the stage, but they became lovers off stage as well. And romance blossomed, and they eventually got married. Now, significantly as well around that time, the Listowel Drama Group performed the play for RTE Radio. And that brought the attention of Eamon and Maura to the RTE authorities, and they were very impressed. And they were offered jobs in the RTE Radio Players. This was around 1950-51. And they moved to Dublin to take part in the plays with RTE. And one night at a party in RTE, after some show, everyone was asked to do their party piece, and Eamon Kelly didn't feel too confident about his singing ability. But one thing he could do was tell a story. So he told a story. And they were all thrilled with the story and delighted with it. And in the room that night, there happened to be a man called Micheál O'Hay, who was the head of entertainment in RTE. And O'Hay said to himself, I can do something with this fella. And it moved on very quickly from there, and he became known as the Shanachie. And he enthralled the country with his stories.
One danger will make you forget the first danger. You know, if you cut your finger, you'll forget your toothache. He forgot all about the Taman and hopped out of the bed and went out to tie down the shed. And when he was gone, the wife turned to the Taman and she said, now's your chance. So he got up and ate the cake.
Flute player Biddy Clifford is a living legend of Sliabh Luachra music who comes from a family of Sliabh Luachra royalty. His father was the great button and piano accordionist John Clifford of Lachine in Guinevere, and his mother has been described as the queen of Sliabh Luachra music, the remarkable fiddle player Jula Clifford, who also came from that famous townland of Lachine in Guinevere. Jula was one of the famous Waver Murphy siblings.
It was a great house for me to be living in as a child of that age. I was brought back at the age of, I think it was 9, I came back. Mm-hmm. And my mother and father and my brother all came back on holidays, and they left me behind. Mm-hmm. And I tell you, there was no tear shed to be left behind, to be honest about it.
You were happy in Lachine?
I was quite happy there, you know.
Yeah.
And of course, going to school in Guinevere, that all became second nature. It just absolutely, totally suited me at that particular stage of my childhood life.
Yeah.
But the music was one thing, and one of my longest recollections was living with my grandmother, and she taking care of me. But
so this is the first tune you learned from your grandmother?
Absolutely.
Mainly.
Yeah.
The Murphy family of Lachine, Guinevere, are probably one of the most famous musical families in the area. Dennis would be the best known, of course. Dennis the Waver, as he was known locally. And then you had his sister Jula, who was a very good musician. And so was Bridgie. And indeed, their father, who was known as Bill the Waver, was leader of a fife and drum band way back. And it was a house that there was always music in.
Dennis was carrying on that style that Poetic set out. Mm-hmm. You know, he played very much like Poetic. Mm-hmm. And Jula, they're very much like Poetic, even all the time. You know, and they were carrying on the style of the area.
Yeah.
And I suppose the way they learned as well.
The Star Above the Garter album, recorded in 1969 by siblings Dennis Murphy and Jula Clifford, is a classic recording of Sliabh Luachra music and is arguably the greatest recording of Sliabh Luachra music ever made.
It's fabulous recording, still a classic in years later on. 1969, Star Above the Garter. I'll always remember Tom Billy's jigs out of that record. They were the first time that they were heard.
If you could try and sum up what was special about their playing, it's a tough question to answer, but even just to talk about some of the features that you think made their music special.
Yeah, that's a very good question. I'd say a lot of it has got to do with the fact that they were brother. I'd say a large amount of it is the fact that they were brother and sister, and that they played so much together when they were younger. Do you know what I mean? That their minds were kind of totally locked into each other. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It was just that magic connection that you get in a family.
Yeah.
Do you know, brother and sister.
Very little
playing
effort.
at this high level of. Do you know what I mean? And that's what made it so totally special.
Yeah.
And of course, something else too, the slow airs. They were the first time those airs came around. You had them, you know. You usually heard the airs played maybe in a classical style, you know, which was fine. But they played it as the Shannon singers of Connemara would sing. The Shannon was in Connemara, you know. Yeah. And Greenie Ronald, O'Rathaille's Grave, you know, all those, and the Blackbird, you know, fabulous air playing as well. Again, of course, down from Poetic, because Poetic was fabulous at the airs as well.
I'm Raibh to Aogán Ó Rathaille, and it's on the Star Above the Garter CD. I suppose it was Nicky, my music teacher, that introduced me to this air. I was preparing at the time in around 1999 for the All-Ireland Fleadh, and I played that air, and I said to Nicky, will you record it in for me into the cassette, because he always did. He said, no, I'll give you, I didn't actually have the Star Above the Garter CD at the time, and he said, I'll record it in for you. So it was Jula Clifford obviously playing it, and I learned it from her playing.
In a moving tribute to Dennis Murphy after his passing, the great Kerry journalist Con Houlihan from Castle Island explained that Dennis was a man that it took generations to make. He said the following: "There is more than technical virtuosity to great art. Others were as skilled as Dennis, but his genius sprang from the very rare feeling for the world that made him. He painted in marvellous colours, but in his music, the intuition of a place and a people was like outcropping rock. You could smell the freshly cut turf and see the dawn growing over Knocknabowl and hear the primeval sound of cows being driven in for milking."
Johnny O'Leary was a renowned accordion player in the distinctive Sliabh Luachra tradition. He learned his music from the great fiddle masters, including Tom Billy Murphy and Padraig O'Keefe. The area has a rich tradition of slow airs, as well as polkas, slides, jigs, reels and hornpipes. Johnny dedicated his life to preserving the Sliabh Luachra style, and he travelled widely to promote it.
Johnny's own musical background, again, he was a great raconteur, a storyteller, and he used to tell the story how when he was very young at home, his uncle Paddy had an accordion. And Paddy really minded his accordion. He didn't want anyone to be at it. But when Paddy'd leave the house, Johnny would go and get the accordion and start playing it. And eventually, parties got tired of giving out to him, and he said, look, play away. And Johnny eventually got lessons from Padraig O'Keefe, and to a lesser extent from Tom Billy Murphy, the fiddler who went around the place on the back of a donkey.
We were very much inclined on traditional music, and we had no other thing to do, only playing music. An uncle of mine bought a 10-key accordion, I learned in that.
How old were you then?
6.5 years of age.
And did he teach you, or did you just take it up?
He couldn't, because he wasn't able to play it all himself. He took a chance to learn himself.
So you just picked it up yourself?
I picked it up myself, and I went from that into Padraig O'Keefe, Scatterlin.
One thing about Johnny was that he had a great facility for learning music, and he picked up tunes by memory. And he said he could be in a house at night as a young fella, and he'd be listening to the tunes. And when he'd go up to bed that night, he would keep playing the tune in his mind, in his head. He'd have all the notes, and he'd know, and in that way he memorized the music. He once said that he had at least 1,000 tunes, he said, in his head again, though a lot of them have been are now in books and everything else by various collectors, but a lot of them he just had in his head. And he'd hear a tune, he'd be, oh yeah, I have that, and he'd play away with it. A lot of the tunes had no names, but he had this great memory, and that kept him going.
It was this vast repertoire of music that led the great Irish music collector Browne Donn to describe Johnny as the national custodian of Sliabh Luachra music. Bernach started the project of collecting Johnny's music in the early 1970s. Ultimately, after Bernach's passing, this project was carried on by Terry Milan, who concluded the work by publishing a book on Johnny O'Leary's music in 1994. The book is titled Johnny O'Leary of Sliabh Luachra, Dance Music from the Cork-Kerry Border. It's a fantastic resource and has been even described as being the Bible of Sliabh Luachra music. Button accordionist Jimmy Doyle of Mullaghcavan in Gnievgwilla is another living legend of Sliabh Luachra music who continues to inspire and influence the next generation of Sliabh Luachra musicians. Jimmy himself was strongly influenced by his great friend and neighbour, Johnny O'Leary.
There was music in those always. You know, there was a few accordions there. Not very good ones, no. Only very poor ones. But Johnny O'Leary then, God rest him. Johnny would be calling to the house 2 or 3 nights a week. And that's how I kind of started to learn.
Learning tunes away by ear.
Yeah. I could learn, I was very quick to pick up music. Mm-hmm. No, I wasn't know. Just I could learn 4 or 5 tunes every night from Johnny.
Yeah.
He was great. Mm-hmm. That's for sure. Mm-hmm. I remember playing the first jig I learned from Johnny. You know what I saw, do you?
Is it the Contaigo?
It's Contaigo jig.
Lovely.
His music typified the spirit of Sliabh Luachra in this vibrant, lively, carefree spirit, the spirit of great joy in the music. And it was essentially music for dancing. And I think Johnny, from my memories of him and Dan O'Connell's and he playing with the Waver for all those years, was that the joy he got from playing for set dancers and how they really responded to his music. And the sets and the slides, the polkas, really, that was, in my view, his specialty. He played wonderful music, and he really captivated that spirit of Sliabh Luachra.
Johnny's final television appearance came at the end of 2003 when he was awarded the prestigious T.G. Cahir Gradam Cheoil Lifetime Achievement Award. Fellow Gniomh Guilleman and renowned fiddler Paddy Cronin received the same award in 2007. In 2014, I myself was greatly honoured to join in their company and become the third musician from Gniomh to receive a Gradam Cheoil Award, when I was lucky enough to be bestowed with the Young Musician of the Year accolade. Rather interestingly, both myself and Paddy Cronin are past pupils of Turin Cahill National School.
Paddy had his own style, I'd say. Played Kerry music lovely, but then he went to America, of course, and he heard the recordings in America of James Morrison and Coleman, and he played exactly like them. You know, he played the Wheels of the World and Rakish Paddy. James Morrison was also recording him back in the 30s, 40s. Paddy played him equally as good.
Fiddle I've now then I got when I was about 17. I got it from Paddy. He brought it over from America. He was a good friend of my mother's. She used to bring me into his house in Whitebridge in Killarney once a week, and I used to learn loads of tunes. I used to record him on the cassette tape and learn loads of tunes. He was always remember him saying his sight read every day just to keep his mind going. When he was older, he was fantastic.
But he could still play slides and polkas his own way, and you always knew that Keith touch was still there.
Yeah.
He always said that there's always a bit of Patrick in me, you know, he says. Patrick came to the window here, and Patrick, he said, they knew each other, he says, they were teachers, they were both teachers, and he says, will you leave out young Cronin, he says, I'm going back to the house to teach him the fiddle. I suppose that's a famous quotation now.
Yeah.
You know. Yeah. And we were thinking there, I would be thinking that would be about 1937 maybe. He was born in 25, so he'd be about 12, 37, 38. You know, so he'd be 12 or 13 years old.
So Patrick Keefe came over, raised up the window of the school. He knew the teachers. He told the teachers, he said, let out young Cronin, he said. I'm going back to the house to teach him. My father had met him, you know, a lot of them had seen him all, they all did. And anyway, when I got back to the house, he had the fiddle all tuned, and he was playing the Swallow's Tail when I did. I says, what's the name of that one? The Swallow's Tail, he said. So I'll never forget that.
He always came up with tunes. He was always going through books.
Paddy's brother Johnny, of course, would have recorded an album in America too.
Yes, I have. Yes, that was lovely. That was lovely music as well, and great Kerry music, great slide and polka playing. Johnny, you know, great player.
So would you kind of say that Johnny Cronin's fiddle playing was slightly different to Paddy's?
It would. I'd say again a different stamp. Johnny did different stamp. You know, I think Johnny was Gniomh.
Yeah.
Paddy could be anywhere at any time. You know,
Depending on
the forum. Yes.
Sean Butler of Knockrower in Scartaglen is a fantastic young accordion player learning in the local style of the area. Sean has been influenced by many local Steve Lucre musicians. Here we see a great example of how the music from the past continues to be preserved and presented in the present. I hope you've enjoyed this programme detailing the music and culture of Sliabh Luachra. My good friend and guitarist Cathal Flood joins me here for a set of 3 old Sliabh Luachra polkas to see you out. From me, Brian O'Leary, Slán agus Tóga Bogé.